Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Melanin Margin, the weekly chat show where conversations about race are never off the table. We're your hosts, Quaviondre Williams.
And Daquon Wilson.
So let's get into this week's conversation. What's hot on the table this week?
Florida is back on the table again for controversial legislation being pushed. This past Wednesday, Florida Republicans passed a bill that would satisfy Governor Ron DeSantis' proposal to create an elections police force. The bill gives $2.5 million to create the Office of Election Crimes and Security and would make ballot harvesting or having more than two ballots a felony, punishable with a fine up to $50,000 and 5 years in prison. Florida Republicans such as Representative Daniel Perez claim that, quote, the whole point of this bill is to deter people from committing fraud. We're trying to stop bad actors, end quote. However, many have pushed back on that notion. Joe Scott, election supervisor in Broward County, commented on the bill stating, quote, these are people who will be looking for crimes where they are none. That has the potential to intimidate a lot of voters and the organizations who try to help voters, end quote. The political director of the voting rights advocacy group Equal Ground, Genesis Robinson, said in a statement, quote, so now we're criminalizing certain acts around the elections process that most folks, particularly in the Black community, have long held as a way to assist those in need. To spend time in jail for simply trying to be a good neighbor, that's a problem, end quote. But I want to pass off the conversation to you. Do you think this bill is more problem maker than problem solver?
Um, this bill is 100% a problem maker. Um, it is just a very posh way of saying that we don't want Black or POC votes to feel like they're welcome here. I mean,
Hello?
echoing Joe Scott, we've already seen time and time again where police officers find crime where there is none. They assume that because of the melanin in your skin, you're up to no good. They assume that you have a weapon or you are more violent because that is what white supremacy teaches us about Black people and POC people. I mean, we don't have to go into detail about how corrupt the police force is because there are hundreds, if not thousands, of articles detailing the excessive force and unlawful killings committed by the police officers against marginalized communities. Um, all that I hear when I read this bill is that Governor DeSantis has found yet another legal avenue to suppress Black voters. This only goes to show you just how the legal system in America is built to work against Black people and people of color. It is a legal form of intimidation to make it even harder to reach marginalized communities that are statistically more likely to need assistance in getting their votes to the polls. I mean, there are also, I don't know about this, I don't know if you think this too, Daquan, but there are also ableist undertones to this bill as well, because the people who are physically unable to go to the polls, they need those third-party services to be able to cast their vote. So this whole situation, I mean, with these new restrictions in place, the fear of police interference or retaliation may overpower the desire for these third parties to assist and create accessibility for all voters. I mean, even critics have said that this bill is intended as a way for DeSantis to appease the Republicans who believe that the 2020 election results were fraudulent and that it is unnecessary, noting that local prosecutors can actually handle those fraud cases. But Daquan, what about you? I mean, do you think that this bill is intentionally created to suppress Black voters?
Absolutely. Absolute. I am absolutely sure, as I am sure the sky is blue. Because, first of all, let's dispel this myth of voter fraud. Because when we look at the numbers, I have looked at over 20 empirical peer reviewed studies, and not a single one of them showed a statistical significance to voter fraud. In fact, they show that you're more likely to get struck by lightning than to encounter voter fraud. So when we see these bills, especially with Republicans as governors and holding the House and Senate in
Mm-hmm.
states, all of these bills are meant for voter suppression. They're meant to create extra barriers to the poll because
Mm-hmm.
that's exactly what this is. We have to realize, when it comes to mail in ballots, the people who do that the most are generally people who vote Democrat. And
Mm-hmm.
we don't make this process any easy to understand what the process is like to mail in the ballot. There's all these, if you've ever done it, there's all of these different things that you have
Yeah.
to do and like say, and all of these little jargony things that you have to read. And it does not make voting accessible. And so when you have a $50,000 fine plus up to 5 years in prison for certain different offenses, and you lay law after law after law just to make voter intimidate them into not voting, it's like, well, like there's all of these things that I can get in trouble for. I don't really understand it, so I'm not going to vote. Or
Mm-hmm.
like in Georgia, where they literally made it illegal for people to hand out food and water to Black people who are waiting in line to vote because in Black communities, people are waiting up to 9 or more hours just to vote in person. And
Mm-hmm.
so we also have to consider, especially that impact that it has on the Black community. The Black community are more likely to be working class or low income, meaning they have jobs. If you are a student in school, you don't get election day off. At least I did not get election day
Mm-hmm.
off. Um, and there's all of these different things, just like you said with ableism, like there's all of these different ableist notions and underpinnings of it as well, because let's be real, when election season comes, we still may very well be in a pandemic. And so people relied
Mm-hmm.
on mail in ballots. And I think that it is absolutely intentional when you consider the 2018 midterm elections, because the 2018 midterm elections had some of the highest voter turnout rates than any other midterm election. And specifically, one of the largest jumps came from voters 18 to 29,
Mm-hmm.
specifically Black voters 18 to 29. More specifically, looking at census data, we find that nearly 46% of Black people between the ages of 18 and 24 registered to vote, and 31% of them voted. That is a high margin for midterm elections. So, what this tells me right now is they saw what happened in 2018, and they're not trying to have that during the 2022 midterm elections because
Mm-hmm.
they want Republicans to gain back control of the House and Senate.
Mm-hmm. I fully agree. I mean, this is also yet another reason why it's integral for marginalized communities specifically to get out and vote.
Right.
We have to stop people like Ron DeSantis from taking any position of power because he is slowly but surely creating more and more legislation that is targeting communities that have fought so long to get the little rights that we do have. And for anyone who is a part of a marginalized community, don't think that Governor DeSantis isn't coming for you next. Like,
Right.
just because his legislation so far hasn't affected you yet doesn't mean that he won't come up with something else in the future. I mean, he's already targeted keeping the truth about racism out of schools to further misinform our children about the realities of the world that we live in. He's targeted the LGBTQIA community to try to erase us from the school system. And now he's targeting Black and POC communities to further suppress their voices, all in an effort to protect whiteness and Christianity. I mean, do you really think that your community won't be next? It really is time for us to wake up and realize that the greatest threat to our society isn't just white supremacy alone, but it's apathy and division. Too
Mm,
many too many of our marginalized communities are fighting amongst each other, playing a game of who has it worse, instead of realizing the fact that if we stand together, we could accomplish so much more than if we stand alone. Daquon, I just want to ask you, like, why do you think it's so difficult for marginalized communities to stand in the spotlight as a unified front?
I think that it's one of these situations where a lot of times there's so many different outside factors that cause
Mm-hmm.
infighting. you have to figure there's people are being attacked on many fronts, whether
Mm-hmm.
it's for your race, whether it's for your sexuality, whatever. And people, let's be real, only have so much attention. So it's like you're
Mm-hmm.
giving this much attention here, and something else is being left in the dark. And so that creates kind of this infighting within marginalized communities. We saw
Mm-hmm.
this especially during, like the Black Power movements of the 60s, where
Mm-hmm.
people were literally like, hey, you're Black first. So, like, we need to focus on that. Queer stuff and women's stuff can come later. I mean, eventually, we saw this coalition between the Black Power movement, the LGBTQ plus movements, the
Mm-hmm.
women's rights movements, and that created such a powerful coalition. And so I
Mm-hmm.
think that now, as we're facing these issues, they saw what happened in the past when they got together. And so they're trying to stop that from happening again.
Mm. I also think too there is a problem with a lot of marginalized communities not understanding intersectionality. Um, Specifically in Black communities, we've noticed too, because that's the only community that I know about, because I'm a part of it, from firsthand, but there is, a lot of division amongst us because, when we say Black Lives Matter, that includes trans lives, that includes gay lives, Black gay lives and Black trans lives. And I think that a lot of times people are like, especially I've noticed in the Black community, there has been a lot of people saying, oh, well, I ain't with that gay shit or that LGBT shit, but the Black stuff, that's what's important. It's kind of like, well, no, because Black and gay, I'm not Black first or gay second, or the case may be. I am both at the same time. I am it's intersections. There is no way to divide those things from my personhood. So I think it's just really frustrating, especially in these communities of color, that we can't understand the fact that two things can exist at the same time, and that having that intersectionality helps us understand that we have to fight, not just for Black cis straight lives. We can't just fight just for Black lives alone. We have to fight for Asian lives, we have to fight for Latina lives, we have to fight for indigenous lives, like, and the fact that there is so much focus on just our community or just a specific community, and not like extending those olive branches, or at the very least understanding that, just focusing on our issues alone doesn't stop the major issue as a whole. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally makes sense. And I think that this gets back at this notion of why it's so important to have conversations about race and
Mm-hmm.
racism, be not only national conversations, but conversations that are in schools, conversations that can be broken down so people realize this type of thing where it's like we are intersectional beings. We have different identities that exist at the same time. And throughout different communities, whether you are a part of the Black community, the Latinx community, Asian community, or Indigenous community, there are struggles that have overlaps. There are struggles that have
Exactly.
similarities, and learning from those similarities, recognizing both the differences and similarities, and being able to gain better empathy for other people and the struggles that they go to.
Exactly.